I'm honored to have been invited to deliver the inaugural Gayle Gilchrist-James Lecture. I'd like to thank the International Federation of Social Workers, IFSW's Social Work and Social Development World Conference, IFSW President Silvana Martinez, IFSW Secretary General Rory Truell, the IFSW Executive Committee, the North American region of IFSW comprised of Canada and the United States, the Canadian Association of Social Workers represented by President Joan Davis Wayland, immediate past President Jan Christensen Wood, Executive Director Fred Phelps, National Association of Social Workers represented by President Mitt Joyner, immediate past President Kathy Wehrman, and CEO Angelo McLean, and the University of Calgary, especially Dean Jackie Siepert and Linda Kreitzer, and members of the Conference Planning Committee. It's also my pleasure to acknowledge the member associations of IFSW in attendance from over 140 countries who represent more than 3 million social workers around the world. Gayle Gilchrist-James was a formidable presence in social work. She left an indelible mark on the profession, both in her home country of Canada, the North American region of IFSW, and on the international stage. And while I'm going to speak to you today about her leadership and the legacy she left for us all, I'd like to begin by talking about the Gayle I knew, the woman who was my friend and colleague for many years. I met Gayle in the late 1980s at my first IFSW general meeting in Tokyo. She was the president of IFSW at the time, and my immediate impression was that she was the classiest social worker I had ever met. She was like a glamorous character from a Hollywood movie. If you met Gayle on the street, you would never guess what she did. But from the self-confidence she exuded, you would know that whatever she did was very important. Gayle and I shared a similar childhood upbringing. We both grew up in rural communities. Gayle in Western Canada and me in New Zealand. My sense is that when you live in a rural community, you play a much larger part in being responsible for everything around you. Much like social work, you have to make it work with whatever resources you have, including yourself. It encourages independence in looking at things from a big picture perspective. You don't resent doing menial tasks because you understand how it all fits together and that progress may be incremental. We both received our primary school education in a one-room schoolhouse. This is an experience that few can relate to today, but Gayle and I shared the belief that this laid an important foundation for how we viewed ourselves and our potential. I'm assuming that many people may not be familiar with a one-room schoolhouse, or else only from the book or the television show Little House on the Prairie. So I'll explain what I mean. You attend school with all the children in your community at the same time, all 10 or maybe 15 of them in the same room. Well, each age group, and there may be only 2 of you, as in my case, is assigned specific lessons. You're also privy to everyone else's lessons, so you have the opportunity to learn and absorb everything being taught in school, which means you can advance as far and as fast as you're motivated to learn. This gives you an innate sense that there are no limits to what one can accomplish or achieve in life. It's very empowering. Gayle never thought of herself as a little girl from a small rural community. She thought of herself as having no limits, no restrictions on where she could go and what she could do. We were kindred spirits in this way. To me, Gayle was the very definition of a sage. Geographically, she was from Canada, but she was a woman of the world. She was ageless, timeless, and a visionary. Many of the ideas she proposed would be considered fresh today. Her leadership was driven by compassion and a professional understanding of her clients' needs. She was accepted and comfortable at all levels and segments of society, in any setting, with any audience, from diplomats and heads of state to a person experiencing homelessness. And she was knowledgeable, well beyond social work. Her sophistication extended to the arts, music, literature, law, science, politics, etc. A good book or a good conversation and a glass of good scotch was her idea of a relaxing time. Gayle and I had similar career paths as well in our respective countries. She was president of the Canadian Association of Social Workers, CASW. I was president of the National Association of Social Workers, NASW, in the U.S. Gayle was the 10th president of IFSW, and I succeeded her as the 11th. It was actually Gayle who took me aside at an IFSW meeting and planted the seed of encouragement for me to consider running for president. And we're both recipients of the Andrew Moravia Apostle Medal, IFSW's highest honor bestowed for contributions to international social work. Another passion Gayle and I shared was for cars, unique cars. It was another way that she communicated to the world that social workers have a fun side too. I spoke with many people as I was preparing to write this speech, one of whom was my good friend Dick Ramsey, who was also one of Gayle's dearest friends. And more than that, he was her most trusted colleague for over 35 years. Dick and Gayle were partners in social work on the world stage. They were an awe-inspiring team. Together, they started many new initiatives and provided great advances in social work governance, both in Canada and within IFSW. Dick and Gayle were instrumental in drafting the first comprehensive Canadian Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics and contributed to the early work with IFSW's definition of social work. During Gayle's tenure as IFSW president, Dick was treasurer, and I learned a great deal from both of them. To quote Gayle, her partnership with Dick was sort of a fearsome twosome. At the IFSW conference in Argentina in 1990, watching them work seamlessly together was a new experience for some cultures. Gayle said one of the most touching experiences of her career was at the closing ceremonies of that conference when Mario Calabro, dean of one of the Argentinian schools of social work, thanked Canada for its gift of observed democracy. And he was referring to the example that Gayle and Dick had demonstrated during the conference that man and woman can work together as equals. I had a similar working partnership in the United States with Jim Carles, who preceded me as president of NASW in California. Jim wrote the book Person in Environment, which presented an important perspective for the practice of social work. And later he founded the California Hall of Distinction, which recognizes distinguished social workers both practitioners and academics throughout California. Dick and Jim later worked together on a University of Calgary grant to develop an interactive CD-ROM which integrated their respective work on person and environment and a holistic social work model. The four of us, Gayle, Dick, Jim, and me, were a bunch of younger people with lots of ideas on what needed to be done, and we went for it. We also had a connection to each other through the professions of our spouses. Dick and Jim were both married to nurses, and Gayle and I were married to doctors. So we always have plenty to talk about. First thing Dick mentioned when I talked to him recently about Gayle was, and I quote, "She was organized." And while that made me chuckle, thinking about her, it also spoke to the heart of who she was as a leader and how she accomplished what she did in her career. Gayle was definitely a big picture person in her approach to everything, but she never forgot the individual or the details, which is what makes a big picture person successful. Gayle was a dedicated professor at the University of Calgary for 29 years. Education and mentorship of new social workers was extremely important to her, and she took extraordinary care of all of her students. Dick shared with me an example of her commitment to her students' well-being. One fall session, a young woman came to Gayle in tears at the beginning of a midterm exam. The young student had just come from the Student Health Center, where she had been told that she had a breast malignancy. She was just 20 years old. Gayle's innate activism kicked in, and she led a set of actions at the school to raise money and provide ongoing emotional support for the student, who was then able to be successfully treated in her hometown and later returned to complete her social work education. Another person I spoke with about Gayle was Dean Jackie Seifert, who also was a colleague of Gayle's for many years at the University of Calgary. Jackie's uncle Dennis was a lifelong friend of Gayle's. The two had attended high school together. And Jackie told me a story of how his uncle had been suspended from school at one point under dubious circumstances. And it was Gayle who, as a mere teenager, took it upon herself to advocate on Dennis' behalf with the school administrators. Imagine a mere teenager having the confidence and tenacity to take on her school in defense of a friend. Jackie believes this incident was the beginning of Gayle's professional role as a social justice warrior. When we say that Gayle was an exceptional social worker and leader, it is because at her core, she was an exceptional human being. She wasn't just advocating for a particular issue or position. She was interested in using that to change the issue, or social work's approach to that issue, or means of relating to that issue. And she was humble in her leadership. As I read through many of her speeches and published works, it struck me how often she used and gave credit to the theories of other professionals in order to solidify the point she was making on an issue. All good ideas did not need to be her own. She respected those that came before her and reveled in any opportunity to collaborate with other social workers. Gayle's leadership was rooted in her compassion and humanitarian perspective. Jackie Seifert described her, and I quote, as a fist within a velvet glove, meaning that she was strong, determined, and unafraid to deliver a difficult message. but she knew how to approach it in such a way as to be inclusive of whomever she was in dialogue with. This is an important lesson we can all learn from Gayle and implement in our own interactions. No matter how passionate we are about an issue or an injustice in the world, treat everyone with the same compassion and dignity as you would want to be treated if the situation were reversed. As the saying goes, you can accomplish more with sugar than vinegar. Gayle definitely demonstrated this throughout her career. Gayle had a motto she used with her students, which many of you have probably heard. Show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and don't be invested in the outcome. In many ways, this is really a roadmap for anyone who practices social work, but it also sums up how Gayle approached all of her leadership roles. And I think we can all agree that Gayle was an exceptional leader. Each of these 4 directives covers an aspect of Gayle's incomparable leadership skills. Show up. If Gayle believed in a cause, she positioned herself at the forefront of it. She didn't worry about how it would look to others or if it was popular. If she had an idea, she spoke out and then had a tremendous gift for communicating that idea to almost anyone, anywhere. She was the great communicator and motivator. She took on issues that affected people all over the world, such as social justice, poverty, child welfare, human rights, and issues for indigenous populations. She could articulate her ideas and put them into motion. Many leaders can do one or the other, but Gayle was adept at both, and she took risks. Now, we often call this innovation. I was recently enjoying some Girl Scout cookies, and when I looked more closely at the box they came in, I noticed it said on it that Girl Scouts are risk takers and innovators, and I thought to myself, their PR people think of these as separate things. Sometimes she showed up for an issue outside of the spotlight, such as her behind-the-scenes advocacy to a lawsuit in the 1990s that addressed the rights of persons with disabilities who were forcibly sterilized in Alberta, Canada, between 1928 and 1972. She proactively produced a series of annual reports on mental health from an earlier period, which included this issue of sterilization. These reports were eventually donated to and cataloged by the Living Archives of Eugenics in Western Canada, and references to her reports are still used today as historical data on the subject, offering ongoing use and value for social work and social services. Even through her own illness, she demonstrated her commitment to showing up. She didn't shut herself away or become inactive in her causes. In fact, she did exactly the opposite. She used her situation to help educate others, shine a light on the resources that were available, and destigmatize the public perception around cancer. She approached her illness in the same way she approached all her other causes. She was passionate about it. She understood it, related to it, and in her own words, made friends with it. Pay attention. Gayle was a person of inclusion, communication, bringing people together, and letting all voices be heard. I think this was the way she paid attention, by listening to and considering many points of view. When Gayle chaired a meeting, everyone was given a chance to articulate his or her opinion, even if in the end the result was not in their favor. This approach proved to be an effective way for her to bridge gaps and connect the dots by understanding where everybody at the table stood on an issue or idea. Gayle could then apply her one-of-a-kind problem-solving and negotiation skills to diffusing any tough situation. Perhaps the best example of this was during IFSW general meetings, where several hundred individuals gathered from different countries and cultures with very different geographic and professional issues to consider from disparate viewpoints. Additionally, there are language barriers that require even more acute listening and understanding of how thoughts and feelings come through in translation. Gayle was so adept at applying her social work skill of starting where the client is in these meetings. She never let an individual or a concern be shoved aside, but instead, bearing in mind person and environment, found a way to bring the concern and the level of the meeting to a productive, if not positive, place. By applying these fundamental principles of social work, no one ever walked out of a meeting, even if their position did not prevail. Tell the truth. On the surface, this sounds like a concept that should be second nature to a social worker. Of course it should be. But I think Gayle had a deeper meaning in mind when putting it into practice. It's no secret that Gayle was the face of social work in Canada, and for good reason, not only because of the serious contributions she made to the social work profession and the Canadian people, but also the way in which she represented Canada in furthering social justice around the world. To be appointed by the highest levels of government to act on behalf of your country is a great honor, but it also carries with it a great responsibility. You're being entrusted to not only tell the truth, but uncover the truth and then develop a solution that will be palatable for the decision makers. Gayle was a master at this. I believe one of the best examples of this is Gayle's work to help establish IFSW's Human Rights Commission in 1988, which I consider to be one of her most important contributions to the profession and globally, and probably one of IFSW's most important legacies to the world. It actually began with IFSW's partnership with Amnesty International. It exemplifies the capacity social work has to speak truth to power and affect real and lasting change. It may not have been a comfortable subject to address, but Gayle knew that it needed to be addressed, and that's all that mattered to her. It began with a letter writing campaign by representatives from the 5 regions supporting missing social workers and missing social work students around the globe, and grew from there, simply continuing to tell the truth, uncover the truth until the evidence of that truth is so overwhelming that those in positions of power must listen. Don't be invested in the outcome. This is really one of the most important lessons we can all take away from Gayle's leadership. Identify the problem or the need and continue to make progress day by day. Don't fixate on the possible barriers. Don't stop yourself from getting involved in a cause you believe in because you're concerned that the results will not turn out the way you want. Believe wholeheartedly in your cause and always move forward, because your involvement will result in something, even if it isn't what you originally intended. However, Gayle wasn't saying that you shouldn't assess the risks involved or develop a detailed strategy for what you hope to accomplish. These are still necessary, and Gayle always had a plan in place. In fact, usually a plan A and a plan B. She threw herself into any cause she believed in 100% because she was confident that she and other social workers she was collaborating with had the education, training, and skills to find leadership solutions to the world's most wicked problems. A good example of this was the way Gayle worked with issues of funding. Lack of immediate funding never dissuaded her from proposing an idea that she knew was the right thing to do. Many of her best proposals received initial resistance based on one factor: no budget. How can we do that? Was a phrase she heard often. In fact, there was no funding for the IFSW Human Rights Commission when it was originally proposed, and even when it ultimately became accepted as policy by the general meeting. I remember being at the IFSW general meeting in Tokyo, where she, along with other IFSW members, proposed the idea for addressing human rights on a large scale, which would eventually result in the Human Rights Commission. Gayle was immediately hit with, "We can't do that. There's no budget for it." I watched Gayle deftly weave her way around this blockade. She firmly believed that procuring the budget for an idea came second to the idea itself having merit for exploration. She had a different motivation, purpose for understanding of the need for resources, which made her successful. Social work and social workers will always need funding. That's just the nature of the work we do. But we can't let that always be the factor that determines the outcome of our ideas and actions. When we talk about Gayle as a leader, it's important to touch on the concept of power. Gayle was very comfortable with being in a position of power. She built her platform and then used it to full effect for social good. She put it to work to create our policies and protect our people. She used it to build relationships that she could call upon when needed. No matter what the level of success she achieved, her social work core values never changed. She recognized that it wasn't about herself, but about the issues she was advocating for. IFSW's International Code of Ethics, recognition of the inherent dignity of humanity, promoting human rights, promoting social justice, promoting the right to self-determination, promoting the right to participation, respect for confidentiality and privacy, treating people as whole persons, ethical use of technology and social media, and personal integrity. I think we as social workers are sometimes conditioned to be cautious of the use of power, probably because so much of what we advocate for is working contrary to those in powerful positions. However, the way in which we are most effective is by sitting side by side with those power positions, sharing our knowledge at that level, gaining a seat at the table to negotiate on behalf of those we serve. Gayle instinctively knew this. She didn't chase power, but not being intimidated by it allowed her to secure opportunities to have her voice and ideas be heard and be an influencer and a decision maker in the process. Because she had that sense of seemingly no limits about her life and work, it led her to incredible places and experiences. She was the senior NGO delegate on Canada's Minister of Health and Welfare's social policy mission to the Republic of China, helping China to explore what was available for the Chinese in the world. She was the only NGO member and only woman of Canada's delegation to the UN Welfare Minister's Interregional Consultation on Developmental Social Welfare in 1987. These were glass ceilings that Gayle was breaking on behalf of all of us, our clients, our profession, and our society. I recently came upon a theory in Time Magazine's The Science of Success issue from Carol Sweck, a psychology professor at Stanford University, which I think perfectly describes Gayle's attitude towards leadership. And I quote, "People with fixed mindsets feel that their own intellect and talents are limited, so they avoid challenges and give up easily. People with growth mindsets perceive that they can cultivate their abilities through hard work and mentoring. Fixed mindset folks see failures as disasters. Growth mindset people see them as opportunities." I think we can all agree that Gayle was definitely of the growth mindset persuasion in her approach to leadership. As I mentioned earlier, when Gayle believed in something, she didn't wait to join someone else's movement. She created the inroads and brought people along with her. This is the practice we try to instill in our social work students at the University of Southern California, providing them with opportunities to engage and create their own solutions on an issue with worldwide impact. An example of this is our school's annual social impact course and fast pitch competition. Students spend a semester working in teams, researching an issue, and creating a tangible, evidence-based solution to one of society's critical problems, such as human trafficking, homelessness, climate, and the environment. They're then taught how to build a presentation and pitch their solution to agencies, businesses, and organizations. It prepares students to think outside the box and to think about the power of social work on a larger scale. In essence, much like Gayle, initiating their own movement on an issue. I think a larger part of Gayle's legacy in leadership is exactly this, inspiring those around her and the next generation to be proactive in creating change. I believe relationship building is at the top of the list of why I think Gayle was a particularly successful leader. This is different to networking, which is also important, but building and maintaining key relationships goes way beyond that. It speaks to establishing credibility and developing rapport. It has a focus rooted in people. It's about identity and knowing yourself and others. As one grows as a leader, one needs to take enough time to get to know people and their motivations. Effective leaders spend a considerable amount of time building relationships, and one does not have to be an extrovert or attend every networking session event to begin building professional relationships. Another way in which Gayle successfully used her leadership platform was with the media. She had erudition about how to raise awareness through media, and she never shied away from it, but she used media effectively to further her social justice goals. Even if it led to criticism of her efforts, she rose above it and was able to distinguish between constructive and non-constructive elements. I've always used a similar approach with media in my leadership roles. The disconnect between our profession as portrayed by the media and in real life was my motivation for expanding my activities as a social worker into the entertainment and news media business. While I was president of the National Association of Social Workers in the United States, I decided to address the problem by creating the NASW Communications Network, or NCN. I saw a need for social workers and social issues to be accurately portrayed in the media to the American and global public, in print, television, film, and radio. And I did something about it. I combined the strength of social workers' incredibly broad range and depth of expertise with the need I saw in the media and entertainment industries for accurate information by creating a resource outlet for consultation that helped to provide a more realistic presentation of social workers and our clients' needs. We provided consultation using the same social work model as we would use with any client or organization, employed the same ethics and values with the same degree of confidentiality. Only the media outlets were the client and NCN was a service provider. We consulted on many issues such as child welfare, poverty, mental health, domestic violence, across many industry shows like 48 Hours on CBS, Daywatch on CNN, and The Today Show on NBC. Every opportunity I'm presented with to educate an individual or the public about social work, sometimes even in my everyday encounters. In the days when I was working with Gayle, I remember being seated next to journalist Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes fame on a flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. He noticed I had a cell phone with me. This was the late 80s, so it was unusual for anyone to have a cell phone, and mine was the size of a brick. When Mike asked me what I did for a living that required me to have such a device, which apparently he didn't have with him at the time, I answered him directly. I'm a professional social worker. I'm helping to eradicate poverty and advocate for persons at the margins of society. I need all the same resources at my disposal to help my clients as network television has. I believe that it's important to tell our own stories now more than ever. It's increasingly important for social workers to raise awareness and be the ones to define the perception of our own profession. Gayle was proud to be a social worker and the work she did to improve the lives of others. Again, she and I were kindred spirits in this philosophy. If anyone asks you what you do, it's easy to say, I work with children or I work with the aging. Take the time to say you're a social worker. And if they don't understand, then take that opportunity to educate them. Long airplane flights are particularly good for this. Additionally, other passengers will be impressed with the conference or the meeting you attended and what you do in international social work. I want to share a quote I found of Gayle's from a speech she gave in 2003 at the University of Calgary for the social work students' first annual Social Action Day. And I quote, "The means by which we manifest our professional privileges and responsibilities are the subject of today's work. One of those means is social action on behalf of client systems of all sizes. Social action is always a means, never an end in and of itself. It's exceptionally hard work, as is all professional work. If you believe that only leaders in this profession do this or are required to do this, you are dead wrong. Every social worker has the opportunity to matter and hopefully the capacity to do so. If one lacks the motivation, I will heartlessly suggest to you that you are in the wrong pew and lack the essential qualifications to be an ordinary member of a global profession." Our world today requires strong and forward-thinking leadership, now more than ever. Individuals who can stand up to the challenges we face and create innovative and lasting change. I firmly believe that social workers have the education and capability to own this leadership space at the micro and macro levels of practice and in research and teaching. Why are social workers suited to leadership? I'm asked this question from time to time, and I always have an answer for it. Because social work has so many things that the world needs. A professional knowledge of an ability to utilize relationships, communications, analysis, research, organization, planning, access, cross-promotional, or effectively using different mediums, platforms to raise awareness, and interdisciplinary ideas. Our skills are applicable to any field. Social work is the ideal training for leadership. We must always recognize the tools we have and start using them. I also believe that our code of ethics play a significant role in why we're suited to leadership. We're rooted in a set of core values: service, social justice, dignity, and the worth of people, relationships, humanity, compassion, integrity, meaning we are trained to do the right thing even when no one is watching. This is one of the things I hope I can inspire you to continue to think about after my presentation is over. That professionally you can draw on your own experience to grow in new directions. With confidence in your skill set and by drawing on your own values, you can do so many things with a social work education. Think big. Pursue your passions and interests. It's important that you do because it will result in better outcomes for your clients and the communities you work with. It will also maximize your own gratification as leaders within your profession. And we, as social workers, can also help empower other social workers to do the same. Leadership is really about knowing yourself and being confident in your knowledge. It's about relating to others and society. It's also about when to get assistance and when to rely solely on your own judgment. to move ideas forward. Our profession is geared that way, to having many people working together to achieve goals. Our education and professional knowledge helps us to accurately assess when to call on others for help or when we can handle it ourselves. It's beneficial for individuals educated as social workers to then expand the reach of social work by applying it in other fields. We should be broadening the scope of what we do, broadening the playing field. Social work education has expanded greatly since Gayle and I were students. The choice used to be direct practice, community organization, or a generic curriculum. I was generic for students without any experience who didn't know anything. That's how I felt when I entered my graduate education. The variety of practice opportunities that are available today are endless. We are seeing more and more social workers become politicians, diplomats, corporate leaders, socially conscious business owners. I'd like to see a social worker become president or prime minister one day. The world needs social workers setting policy and enacting laws fully equipped with the knowledge of what's needed by those who are most vulnerable in our society. In the US, many members of our Congress are and have been social workers. Those in positions of leadership need to reach out and give back. Because Gayle was an academic as well as a practitioner, she knew how to integrate these two capacities to empower other social workers and be an influential mentor to social work students. My social work education is the only formal graduate education I have. And along with my experience, it served me well. It's provided me with the key elements for success, not only as a social worker, but as a leader. You represent many backgrounds and a diversity of expertise and accomplishments. I encourage you to view your own experience and training through a similar lens. Social workers shouldn't be hesitant about having a voice, of speaking out. We should always be challenging the stigma that's placed on our profession and on our clients by those who don't understand it. We must strive to take a seat at the table and take pride in what we bring to that table. We're trained to empower others, meaning individuals and communities. But do we ask, how do we empower the issues? One way of doing this is through transdisciplinary partnerships with other professions. At our School of Social Work at the University of Southern California, our faculty are always looking for ways to expand the reach of the issues they're passionate about by having social work partner with other schools who are also addressing the same issues. Recently, one of our professors became a volunteer at a human rights clinic that was established by the School of Medicine at USC to advocate on behalf of those seeking asylum in the United States due to physical or psychological trauma experienced in their own country. The clinic provides free forensic medical and psychological evaluations, which can be used as evidence in legal cases for asylum. Through the volunteerism of our social work professor, it was determined that the need for psychosocial evaluations outweighed the need for medical evaluations, and social work was better suited to provide these evaluations and could also provide information and access to other resources that are available to the asylum-seeking community. The medical school quickly recognized that social workers were expertly trained to provide these services and to also provide training in this area to the medical professionals at the clinic. The result is now that the social work school partners with the medical school in the human rights clinic, providing opportunities for our faculty, alumni, and students to become active in the empowerment of this issue and the advocacy of individuals in need. And it all started because one social work professor volunteered her social work skills to another discipline. Another question we should be asking is, how do we empower the profession? The best way, of course, is to place ourselves as social workers at the table to be part of the active decision-making nexus of all issues. Second to this, we empower the profession when we speak out strategically on an issue, meaning that we plan to what audience we need to speak out in order to garner the greatest amount and type of impact. I also think that the work of member associations in IFSW and individuals as friends is a tremendous example of how all of us can and do empower the profession internationally. The effectiveness of IFSW structure, that all member associations are equally afforded one vote, that all voices around the world are heard on any issue, is strategic collaboration. Strength in numbers and diversity of expertise, membership and participation in IFSW moves the profession forward. This again speaks to our growing standing in the world through leadership. The world needs movers and shakers within our profession, active players. It's waiting for us to make the next move. Gayle was a mentor to so many people. She was a mentor to me. In particular, she mentored me within the international stage. I learned a great deal from her, and she was always there, no matter the concern or the issue, to lend a reassuring voice to the situation. I still sometimes sit and wonder when contemplating a tough dilemma, what would Gayle do? How would she deal with this mess? I use her examples of advocacy, strategic thinking, relationship building, and leadership as a guide. Gayle got things done, but she also knew how to have fun and not take herself too seriously, even though she did serious work. I think that's what we all appreciated about her as a friend and colleague. It's what made working with her always an exciting adventure. Gayle was all about choice. She lived large and thought large, even at her memorial service, which Gayle herself meticulously planned as only she could. These attributes were present. Gayle was a connoisseur of good Scotch. She even named her dog Cardew. And she arranged for every kind of Scotch you could imagine to be enjoyed that day. She wanted people to enjoy themselves, to try something new, to see things differently, because that's what she always did. Don't be afraid to think differently. Social work affords us the opportunity. We need to take advantage of this. In life, Gayle was a force of nature. In passing, she left a legacy that will stand the test of time. What she bequeathed to us as social workers was a template for where she believed our profession had the potential to go. The sky is the limit. All of us now must carry the torch forward. Perhaps my Kiwi colleague, Fiona Robertson, IFSW's official archivist and former treasurer, summed it up best. Gayle was a citizen of the world, and thank God she was one of us.